sign of being a government worker because they serve the king. They serve essentially individuals that run things. So a weak sun is not necessarily something to be afraid of. It just means ego is not so big, and the person with a weak sun doesn't need to be in charge. Sometimes they're put in charge, but they don't need to be. A person with a strong sun wants to be the commander, wants to be the leader. And we'll look at some charts as we go through the weeks with really strong suns, which are really good, and really strong suns, which are really, really bad. So, and weak suns, which are good, and weak suns, which are bad. So just because a planet's weak or strong by certain sign placements, it doesn't mean that it'll necessarily be a bad planet. A lot of it depends on the entire composition of the chart. So that's what'll happen. Oftentimes you'll see a lot of people looking at their charts and saying, I have this particular pattern. This means I'm not good at this. Well, perhaps you're not good at certain aspects of a thing, but perhaps you have other traits to make up for it. So whenever we look at charts, we want to look at the entire chart, not just one small segment of it. The sun rules Leo, as we said before. It's exalted. It's in its best possible sign placement when it's in Aries. And Aries is a leadership sign, so that would make sense. So whenever you see a person with a strong sun in Aries, they're going to be really, really powerful, really pushy. Now again, one of the things you have to remember about the Indian zodiac is that Aries sun doesn't become exalted until after April 15th. Between April 15th and May 15th is exalted. In Western astrology, between March 22nd and April 22nd or thereabouts, the sun's exalted. So there's a difference. So the only people that meet the conditions in both sets of astrological systems are those born roughly between April 15th and April 21st. But still, those are strong suns. Even people born between March 22nd and April 1st are strong suns, and April 15th are strong suns because the sun's heading towards its exaltation. It's gathering up steam. Weak suns tend to exist in the sign Libra, okay? And the reason the sun is weak in Libra is the sign connected with relationships. So you can't really have a person who's selfish doing really, really well in relationships. Relationships are supposed to be a compromise, kind of a split, or kind of a share of obligations. It's a give and take. So if the sun is in Libra, the person will tend to give a lot to the relationship partner. The sun won't be strong. So they won't. And unfortunately, sometimes these people will not speak up for themselves, or they'll overcompensate in other ways. So it doesn't necessarily mean they'll be easily pushed aside. That's a little bit of an oversimplification, but they may overcompensate. They have conditions in charts which cancel a debilitated planet, and those are important to understanding the entire chart. The next planet in sequence we were talking about is the moon, and the moon is exalted in Taurus, and it rules Cancer. So Cancer is connected with and the sun, by the way, is in its own sign Leo, which is the sign of the king. So essentially, I think that's fairly self-explanatory. The sun also stands for temples. It stands for the self. It stands for overall health. So if a person has a strong sun, usually they're healthy. If a person has a weak sun, usually they'll have some kinds of problems with their immune system, or not necessarily with their immune system, but they might be more susceptible to illnesses. But again, that's a vast overgeneralization. The moon stands for caring for people, is mother, and the sun is father, so the moon is mother. And essentially, the moon does well in Taurus. It does extremely well in Taurus. Taurus is sort of a luxury making or a building sign. It makes sure everyone's taken care of. That's one thing that Taurus actually does. In its less selfish side, in its more selfish side, it likes to accumulate goods. And essentially, if the moon is in Cancer, is content, is satisfied with life. A lot of people who have moon in Cancer, especially if the moon is not affected adversely by other planets, will tend to be very peaceful, very calm, very charming. Okay, the moon is a charming planet. It's very attractive. Okay, so while the sun is a leader, the moon leads by charm or by example. So if you think about good queens or good first ladies, or even certain celebrities that seem to be very charming will usually have strong moons. Mercury it rules Gemini, but it's both exalted and in its own sign in Virgo. So Mercury's connected with communications. It's connected with how we talk with each other, how we communicate, how we deal with each other. It's sort of an intermediary planet between, so it's very close to the sun, always very close to the sun. And essentially Mercury has to do with critical thinking. It has to do with speech, logic, writing, how we express ourselves. So we're thinking about, this is the sun, this is the moon, this is Mercury, this is where we're speaking and how we're expressing ourselves, okay? So essentially Mercury also has to do with cleansing the body. So the sixth house, or Virgo as a natural sixth house, has to do with purifying things. And Mercury is exalted down there, so it's very good at sifting through details, distinguishing levels and degrees of correctness or incorrectness, and also extremely good at writing. So people with strong Mercuries tend to be exceptional writers, or they'll tend to be drawn towards fields like communication, and also in fields where they're intermediaries with other people. So a strong Mercury is great. There's a lot of talk about Mercury retrograde. We just came out of one, and some Mercury retrogrades are better than others, and some Mercury retrogrades are worse than others. This last one we had was not a really good one. This was around the end of March, or around March 6th to just last week. So essentially, Mercury retrogrades happen 3 times a year. They're a very common phenomenon, and communications are essentially get stifled, or they get confused or twisted. So we'll talk more in detail about that, because it's a little bit of an oversimplification of Mercury retrograde. Mercury retrograde actually does some good things in their chart, and we'll touch on those. The next planet in line is Venus. Venus is connected with relationships. That's its primary indicator, but it's also a teaching planet. It's considered one of the teaching planets along with Jupiter, and we'll get to Jupiter in a few minutes. And Venus is represented by the VE, and if we look at the chart, you'll see that Mercury is recognized by the ME, and the Sun by SU, and SA is Saturn. But Venus is VE. And Venus, wherever Venus is located in a chart, the person is sweet, kind, pure, very nice, very comforting. Can also be a little bit selfish, but basically they try to guide people and try to help people. Venus is a planet connected with partnerships. It likes partnerships, it likes fine arts, it likes beauty, it likes not necessarily tranquility, because it's connected with music. Its connection with music gives it an indirect connection with mathematics and physics. A lot of the great physicists or revolutionary thinkers of the past 200 years had really strong Venuses. So people like Albert Einstein had an exalted Venus. So Venus is exalted in Pisces, which is a sign ruled by Jupiter. So you have 2 powerful teaching planets put together. And that will give differences in perspective, which are outside the established order. But Venus is most, above all, connected with knowledge. It's connected with beauty. It's also connected somewhat with relations with the opposite sex or with the same sex. So any kind of physical relationship is under the domain of Venus, and even romantic relationships, so the things you feel in your heart right here. When you love somebody, those are ruled by Venus. And it's often connected, it's often a misunderstood planet, I think, especially in Indian astrology, because they have two camps in Indian astrology. One are called the Ashuras, who are considered like the bad guys, like the Greek Titans, and they have the Devas, who are the good guys. And they help maintain the universe. But Venus has an important role in guiding the Ashuras. He's the guru of the Ashuras. And essentially he's the guru or the teacher of the more chaotic forces in the world. So he actually keeps them in check to a certain extent. And the planet actually is connected to a very strong extent with mantras, and especially sound, and also with quote unquote magic. So we won't talk too much about magic because I don't want to offend anybody, but basically there's a mantra tradition in India which is very similar. It's similar, not identical, to prayer in Christian and Islamic traditions, and Venus would be connected with those things as well. All right, but there's so many features to the planets. This is just a skim through, to be honest with you. But if Venus is strong in the chart, basically it does give a good relationship life. It tends to give a lot of personal contentment, like the moon, and it usually makes a person relatively smart. The planet next to that is Mars, and Mars rules Scorpio and Aries, as I said. So Mars is, from what I've seen, from my experience as an astrologer in nearly 30 years, Mars is the fastest planet to act. It acts quickly, it acts decisively, it doesn't stop and outthink itself. So Mars, whenever you see Mars in a chart, the person's going to be fast, going to be quick, going to be really on their feet. And also that'll be an area in life in which a person's a little bit impulsive or a little bit quick to act, but also usually very disciplined. So Mars rules things like martial arts, not accidentally. The name is derived from Mars, and that usually involves a good deal of discipline and practice. Mars, oddly enough, in Indian astrology is also connected with meditation, because everything is a moving meditation to Mars. So Mars acts without thinking. That's essentially, thought is required, but it's not meditation. Non-thought is meditation. So essentially, if you're moving from no action to action, that's a Martian movement. Okay, so meditation is not thinking. It's not deliberating. That's a Mercury trait. That's a Jupiter trait. Meditation is calming down, emptying the mind, and then after meditation comes action. So Mars is connected with both those things. It's also connected, oddly enough, with logic. But logic is essentially a Martian attribute, because especially if you have people who are lawyers, people who are lawyers have to have a very strong Mars, people who are politicians have to have a very strong Mars. They have to deal in logic, and they have to deal in convincing people of the rightness of their position. And that is usually done through arguments which are connected through strategy with either the emotions or with the facts. So whenever you see a person with a strong Mars in their chart, they're going to be very logical, very precise, almost to really betray the geek in me, almost Star Trek level logic, like Vulcan logic. Okay, and they won't be afraid to act, and they won't be afraid to fight. The next planet in sequence is Jupiter. Jupiter is connected with wisdom, essentially following the right path in life, and essentially with contentment in following your successors or the people who come before you. So most people who have a strong Jupiter are very strong traditionalists. They follow the teachings of their ancestors very seriously. Most people who have a strong Jupiter are usually connected with education. because Jupiter's a teaching planet. Venus is as well, but Jupiter's more of a conventional education planet. And Jupiter's also the planet which is connected with luck. Venus is to a lesser extent, but Jupiter is what they call big luck. So if Jupiter's really strong in a chart, the person is going to have usually fairly good luck in life, or else they'll have a lot of whatever area Jupiter touches. I have forgotten to mention Mars is exalted in Capricorn, and essentially that's a building place. So people who work very, very strongly in life are going to have a strong Mars. They're going to be very action oriented, and Cancer is a debilitation sign. So essentially Mars doesn't do well in the heart, or it doesn't do well in the home life. It causes fights. So essentially, and Jupiter and Venus's planet of debilitation, and I apologize for missing this earlier, is Virgo. So Venus is in Virgo. It's a very critical sign. It's a sign connected with purification, with making sure that things are refined and refined and refined. And Venus is already considered a very refined planet anyway. So in some ways what it does is it turns that refinement into a little bit of hyper-pickiness. And people with debilitated Venuses are very hard to please. They're often very beautiful, but they're very difficult to please. So let's move forward. Jupiter's own sign are Sagittarius and Pisces. Pisces is connected with liberation, or what they call pleasures of the bed in India. So these can be everything from what we would normally consider to be pleasures of the bed, like things like sexual relations, but also things like sleeping. So if a person sleeps well, they'll have a really good Jupiter in their chart. If they don't sleep well, Jupiter's going to have some kind of affliction to it. So these sound like very, very small things to consider, but they're very important when you're going through them yourself. So sleep, the ability to sleep actually impacts how logically our mind works, how well we act, how wisely we behave. I think we've all met people who get too little sleep and they're cranky and they don't want to do anything new, and it's understandable because they have no energy. So Jupiter is the reservoir of energy. You go back to sleep, you get renewed energy. You go back